down there, there's a lot of new houses.
All right, I think we're going to get moving into our next section. So we have chapter 2 to cover. There's a little bit of activity in the social hall, but it's not too bad. So I think we're going to try and leave the doors open as much as we can. It helps quite a bit with the oh, that's weird. Okay. There we go. All right, so this week we start with the... Oh, they're being noisier than I thought. Okay. If it gets to be too loud, then...
Just go tell them to be quiet.
No. We have to share space on Wednesday nights. That's just one of the issues. Okay, so we want to start with Jesus and the Magi. In a way, I think it's important to note the contrast between the different groups of people. So this is at the middle of page 11. That the Magi are the ones that we think of coming to welcome Jesus and one of the groups. But in a way, it's also highlighting the place of Herod. So Herod, he stays in his palace. He is concerned about a political usurper. I kind of wonder, I think he is a little bit ambiguous at this point. Like, I kind of wonder if at first he's curious about welcoming the Christ child, like that he's curious about the Messiah. He goes to ask the chief priests, and I think it notes that all of Jerusalem is stirred up by this. All of it is kind of in an uproar. You have to have a sense of the time. So they were in the time period about 490 years from the prophecy of Daniel. Daniel had said that the people were going to be in exile for 70 weeks of years. So 490 years, 500 years before the life of Jesus is about the time of Daniel and the Babylonian exile, at least part of it. So the Magi show up and they're talking about finding this king. And so this chapter sets up a contrast between Herod, who's the king of the Jews, who should be welcoming the Messiah because that's what the king is supposed to do, and the Magi, who are from far away. And so you have the Israelite who doesn't welcome Jesus. There's no room for him in their hearts and in the inn, one could say. And you have the Magi who are traveling great distances in order to find the Christ child. So the Gentiles from the far off land, they're Gentiles. They're not Jews either. They don't follow the Jewish faith. They are stargazers. We have reason to believe that they have come to a kind of faith in God. It's possible that they're from a religion called Zoroastrianism, which has, it's an ancient Persian religion that has some similarities to Judaism and Christianity, not necessarily a lot. But you have these Gentile kings who are coming to find Jesus, bringing him gold and frankincense and myrrh. And then you have the Israelite king who's going to end up bringing death. And so you have to see and kind of feel that contrast to feel the setup in this chapter. The Magi are probably from Persia. Christianity has combined Magi with the verse about people bringing gold and frankincense, and so they become the traditional gifts of the Magi. But I don't remember if it actually spells that out in the New Testament or if that's just one of the combinations. What you learn about the Christmas story is like our nativity scenes and the different things that we have combine a whole pile of biblical stories together. There's not a single narrative that gives you the whole nativity scene. It's like different pieces of different gospels and different animals from different passages in the Old Testament, and the nativity scene brings it all together. And Christianity is famous for that. If you've heard of something like the 7 last words of Christ, that's a very famous set of words and sermons that priests have given for a long time. Fulton Sheen has a major series about the 7 last words that many of you have probably heard at least once. Well, that's a combination of all the Gospels. It takes things that Jesus says in the different Gospels and sort of brings them all together into a single story. The nativity scene is like that. It's not just a single narrative that's playing out from beginning to end in one of the Gospels. It's actually different parts of different things, put together and made into a single story. That's certainly not a bad thing. But it's like if you're looking through the Bible expecting to read like Mary and Joseph went to a manger and this is what it looked like and this is everyone there, you won't find it. It's not in there. So Christian imagination and centuries of meditation on it have added these different things. So the Magi are not on an easy journey. They're crossing difficult terrain. It's very, very likely if they're from Persia, you don't go straight. So Israel is along the Mediterranean coast. Persia is quite far away. Lots of you know where modern day Iran is. That's the modern country of Persia. The Straits of Hormuz and those kind of things near Afghanistan, Pakistan. Like that's over where Iran is, south of the Caspian Sea. To get from there to ancient Israel, they would have had to follow the Tigris and Euphrates rivers north and then crossed over toward the Mediterranean and then come south along the Mediterranean because they need water. And between Iran and Israel, if you would go straight like we would like to today, is a giant desert that stretches for many hundreds of miles. So you don't cross it unless you absolutely have to. You would take your caravans around to the north, or at least travel through some of the trading cities. There's some oases and different things. Regardless, this is a journey that the Magi take several months to do. This isn't like they pack their car and they're going on a family vacation and they're going to get there tomorrow. And I think this is a good way to think of it. It's helpful to think about it this way. What did their wives say? What would you say to your husbands if they told you, honey, I'm going to take the majority of our wealth and I'm going to pack a car and I'm going to go find a newborn king? I mean, think of this, because it's kind of nuts. It's not an easy thing. And realistically, there's no way they decided to travel alone. Kings at this time don't do that. They bring slaves, they bring camels, they have a caravan, that kind of thing. They didn't just, okay, honey, me and the boys marching our 3 camels across into the desert. Their wives very likely thought they were nuts if they were married. They probably threatened divorce or anything under the sun. But I think it's important to see that and to feel it because it raises a question, why? Why did they go? Think about what it would take in your heart to decide to make a journey of 6 months to a country where you don't understand the language, to find a king because you saw a star. It's not until you start to see the difficulty of the journey and the reality of how much conviction that would take. I mean, how many of us would give up after a month? Like, okay, Lord, we kind of did this thing, you followed the star, and keeps moving on. So, see you later, goodbye, I'm going back home. We're asked to do things that are a lot easier than a 6-month journey, and we chicken out all the time. And then it's like, we get to the story of the Magi, like, oh yeah, they wandered. They came and they visited Jesus and everything was fine. And it's like, no, nothing is fine about the story. And what it does is it cheapens their faith. Like, why are the Magi saints? Because they did this. When you start to see the cost of it, when you start to feel how long it takes, when you start to encounter what it meant for them, then I think you can see the kind of faith that was guiding them. It's like until we put those pieces back in the story, it's just sort of, it's a little bit too much of a cartoon or an image or a caricature. And it's like we have to put the meat back in the story, because all of a sudden it gives you a different flavor for the Magi. Like, they were willing to risk, much of their inheritance, most of the things in their lives. This probably cost them the majority of their wealth. Not because they're giving it all to Jesus, but just to make the journey. I mean, if you're going on a journey this far, you have to figure out how to feed people. And, to carry it. And about the third dust storm in the desert, I'd be like, Lord, and I think that we need to feel that. So there's a star that is a sign of a king's arrival. You will find that prophecy in the book of Numbers, a prophet and a donkey called Balaam and Balak. It's rather a funny story in the Old Testament about how this man is beating his donkey, and the donkey sees an angel, and eventually the angel's like, I could kill you now. And the guy's like, what? And he's like, yeah, the donkey saw me. That's why he wouldn't come any closer, but I could kill you. He ends up quite chastened. So they follow this. And one of the things that's important, this, I think, is a modern preoccupation. People try and figure out what on earth was the star. What did the Magi see? And they'll talk about, different arrangements of constellations and this planet and that planet, and it could have been something very unique or a supernova, and it could have been those things. But one of the things that's odd about the star in the Bible is that it moves. And stars, as we understand them now, don't move. At least not very much, not relative to Earth. And so you can't really fit astronomical phenomena like a giant, star, like we would have like our sun, into the biblical narrative very well, because those kind of stars don't float and lead you on a journey to go find a king. And we know that the star moves because where does a star go first? It's not to Bethlehem. The star takes them to Jerusalem first, to Herod. And it doesn't move to Bethlehem until after they're in Jerusalem. So it's definitely something that is moving. Stars as a sign of the king, that's a popular image in the popular mind. One of the great biblical images, when it talks about like the heavens will be shaken and the stars will fall to the earth, you can find those, lots of people read those as a prophecy of the end times and this great cataclysm, and it might be that, but it's a biblical image that's used for the fall of an empire. And so it's used all over the place. It's used for the fall of Babylon. It's used for a whole series of things. That's why it appears in Revelation. Like the stars and the heavens were thought of in some ways to kind of mirror life on earth. And so a great king had a star. And if the star goes out, then usually it means the great king's going to die. And they have a different sensibility about it. And some of this is because they live in a world of dark sky. If you've never experienced this, it's well worth looking up when you get home what dark sky actually looks like. Because we live in a world of light pollution. And it's one of the things that is very easy to forget. And if you see a picture of actual dark sky, what the sky is like without any background stuff from streetlights and all kinds of things, the Milky Way stretches as a giant river from one horizon to another, and it's purple and gray and has all these colors in it, and you can see, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 30 or 40,000 stars with the naked eye, and a lot more if you're in a truly dark place. We don't have too many places in the United States left that you can actually find dark sky. In some parts of rural Wyoming you can. Most of North Dakota is out. because of the streetlights from the cities like Fargo. They travel out for more than 100 miles, and then the flaring of gas in the western part of the state produces a lot of light pollution. Now, you can see a lot more if you get outside of Fargo into the rural countryside where a lot of you grew up. You certainly see a lot more stars, but dark sky is pretty dramatic. It's well worth seeing a picture of. It's actually one of the things that I would like to make a trip for, or if you go on a cruise, you'll very often see it if you're kind of way out in the ocean. You'll actually get to see dark sky, and it's dramatically more stars than you're used to. And I think that's important because sometimes if you think about the night sky like we have in Fargo, the night sky is boring. There's nothing to look at. When there's thousands and thousands of stars and you see them as part of this great river, you start to encounter some of the wonder of it that would motivate people like the Magi to come.
Big Bend National Park is
Part of Texas, yep.
in Arizona. They're much more aware of light pollution and not.
You can get to it. It's just like if you look at a map of the states, you'll see that they have it mapped out, and you can see areas where you can get true dark sky, but it's pretty rare and pretty hard to find. One of the better places is if you get into northern Minnesota, like Boundary Waters Canoe area, because there's no major cities for several hundred miles in any direction. And you really do have to be far away from stuff. Like even in Harvey, where I grew up, you can certainly see a lot more stars than you can here in Fargo, but it's nothing like true dark sky. When you actually see a picture of it. Someday I have a desire to do one of the Northern Lights trips where you get out and they have glass ceilings in rooms and you can just see, the Northern Lights. You have to go pretty far north to do it. Sometimes cruises do it, but where it's like the whole sky is colored in every direction. It's something pretty amazing. And I comment on that because this is just part of our world that has changed. We don't live in a world that looks at the sky nearly as much as they used to. And if you actually see what it looks like, it's like, oh yeah, I could look at that. That would be a lot more awe-inspiring. That would be a lot more, that there's something much more, it tugs on your heart a lot more when you actually see what it looks like. So I would encourage you, look that up tonight. It's kind of a neat picture. I want to get some of it. I think I want to get a picture of it for my wall at some point. So, the newborn king of the Jews. There's a play on words here that's happening because Herod is actually not officially Jewish. Herod was from a mixed family. I forget if it's his mother or his father, but they were from the land of Edom, which is east of Israel and kind of at war with the children of Israel. And so part of the narrative that's happening is Herod the true king of Israel? And the answer that the Bible's kind of saying is no. The real king of Israel is Jesus because he's in the line of David. Remember that big long genealogy? Jesus is the rightful heir. Joseph, his father, would be the rightful heir of the throne. But Herod is sitting on it. How did Herod become the king? Well, he came from a very well-off family who sent him to Rome, and he got in with the emperor who made him king and sent him back. And so Herod is sort of always on this mission to prove his legitimacy. It's why we think he worked on rebuilding the temple. So if you remember in the life of Jesus, there's that story about Jesus says, I will destroy this temple and raise it up in 3 days. And there's this note that says he was talking about the temple of his body because the Jerusalem temple had been under construction. I forget if is it 27 years in the scripture passage? Anyway, it ends up being 46 or 47 years of rebuilding the Jerusalem temple that Herod began. And then you have another strange thing. So the chief priests and the scribes, it notes that they assemble together. And again, there's a deeper meaning to the Greek here. It's not just like they got together to talk about it and they're interested in searching the scriptures. Like them assembling together is the same kind of word that's used when they gather together to conspire against Jesus. Like, it's not that they're innocently searching. It's not that they're students and they're looking through the law. It's like they're getting together to conspire against him. And so you have this kind of strange thing because it's a baby. Who is the baby threatening? The answer is no one. Babies don't threaten. They're weak. You have to hold them and care for them and feed them and do everything. And yet already in the life of Jesus, you see this kind of dramatic contrast because the chief priests and the scribes and Herod and his court, they're all afraid of a baby. By this point, Herod is paranoid. One of the things that you also have to know about him is he becomes famous in Israel. He ends up killing his wife and killing most of his family and his sons because he thought that they were conspiring against him. And the sad reality is they very well may have been, because the more paranoid you get and the crazier you are, the more people think they should get rid of you. But in much of his life, going to lunch with Herod was the worst invitation you could have, and people would try and get out of it because usually you went for a swim in the ocean and forgot to take a breath. It wasn't something that you usually survived. And so Herod is consumed by the problem of looking for rivals to his throne. And this happens to all kinds of people that amass too much authority. They start to become paranoid, and their paranoia starts to take over, and they lose that connection to reality. So Herod is either in the midst of a battle, he seems to want to use the Magi against Jesus, like, tell me about where you find him, excuse me, so that I may come and worship the King of the Jews. Now, could he have a real desire? I think there's probably part of him that does really desire to find Jesus. He shows sometimes of genuine curiosity, but paranoia has this habit of creeping into and poisoning everything. So it's like you can have someone with a good desire, you can have someone who wants to move in a good direction, right? And if you think about addiction, then what happens? It's the temptation or the moment or something sort of comes and gets in the way. I suspect that's what's happening with Herod, but someone could make a different argument. They could say he was rotten to the core from the beginning. I don't know, I like to believe that there's some goodness left, but there might not be a whole lot. It's very possible that anxiety and fear start to rise in him, like to welcome the newborn King of the Jews. Maybe there is part of him that's really like the Messiah, and he's come and he's here, and I should go and find him. And then he starts to get afraid, like if he's the King of the Jews, then what's going to be left for me? And already, as Christians, we should look at this a little bit strangely, because did Jesus come to overthrow the kingdom of Herod? Not at all. Jesus isn't real interested in overthrowing the Romans. He doesn't do it. He's not real interested in amassing political power and authority. That's one of the great changes of the coming of the Messiah, is that he is in it for our hearts, for our souls, not so much for the physical land. You know, it's not, he didn't reconquer Israel in the sense of a chunk of ground on earth. He wants to reconstitute Israel as a spiritual reality, as a kingdom that is a kingdom of hearts. And so there's this massive shift from what is physical and visible in this world to what is spiritual, what unites us all. Like the problem that Jesus came to solve and tackle is sin, not Rome. They don't know that yet, but we do. And so I think there's a lot of good directions to take, meditating on the Magi. Would you have the courage and faith to set out like they would? What would it take to inspire you to do something like that? Maybe that helps you appreciate the greatness of these men. Maybe their wives came with them. I don't think that's a bad way to imagine it either. If your husband wanted to go somewhere for 6 months, you'd probably say, okay, buckle up, honey. We're going on a trip. You might be like, I don't want to go with you. And you would say, well, you don't have a choice. This is how this is going to work. You know, you can run it in lots of directions. You could look at the gifts that they bring and the offerings. So they go to Bethlehem, the city of David, the city where the Messiah is to be born. The Magi find them in the house, not the manger. I think that's probably significant. It's very likely that after the census, people started leaving. There was room for them somewhere, and Mary and Joseph move into a house. That seems to be what it indicates. By tradition, if you go to Israel today and Bethlehem, the area that they say is the birth site of Jesus is in an ancient network of caves, where indeed they kept animals for inns at that time. So Jesus was born in a cave, not a nice wooden barn. They don't have wooden barns. Those don't exist anywhere. That, again, is part of our sort of creation of a Christmas story. And it's not a bad part. But Jesus is probably born in a cave. So the Magi, there's another puzzle in the Greek here that you wouldn't hear in English. It says they prostrated themselves. It's going to use the word like proskunesin, which means they like bow down to worship God. Like it's a much stronger sense in Greek and in the Bible than it is in English. So when it says they prostrated themselves, you have to think of them like bowing down before the king to worship him. Like this is something that you do to God. This is something that you do to like the great ruler of the Persians kind of thing. And so again, you have this sort of beautiful spiritual reality that it's speaking to, that these Magi who are Gentiles, who shouldn't know about the coming of the Messiah, are prostrating themselves. Herod is trying to kill, and these Magi are taking up the proper posture. The gifts of the Magi: gold for the true king, frankincense for the true God. Frankincense was used in the worship of the temple, and myrrh for burial. And so you have Magi who find the true king. They were searching for truth in their hearts, and who do they find? Jesus. You have Herod and the religious authorities, and they're not searching for the true king, and so they don't find him. And I think this should be great hope for those who aren't formally Christian, because it's a sign that those who seek the truth with their heart can find what they're looking for. There's something beautiful about that. It's also good to think about searching. The wise men end up leaving for their country. They don't return to Herod. They're warned by angels, but they don't stay with Christ either. That's an interesting thing. I wonder, it's like if you found the king of the universe, you'd think okay, I'll build the house next door. Right? You spend most of your money, you leave your country, you are searching for your whole life to find this kid. You come and find him, and then you're like, okay, seen it, going home now. Maybe they go back home as missionaries. Maybe they go to tell their people about the Christ child. There's a lot of possibilities there that we just don't know. It just says they depart for home. Maybe they're kind of sent back to their own people by the Lord. And then the Lord appears in a dream to Joseph: take the child to Egypt. Egypt is this biblical place of slavery, the land of sin, the land of turning away from God. Joseph, there's an Old Testament Joseph, shows up at the book of Genesis, end of the book of Genesis, and a New Testament Joseph, the father of Jesus. This isn't an easy choice. You don't take your wife with a newborn to a foreign country where you don't have a job and you don't speak the language and nothing is available unless you're pretty desperate. They were desperate. Now, it might not mean they're traveling with nothing. It's very, very likely they go to Alexandria first. Alexandria is a city of Egypt on the Mediterranean coast. It was the largest in the world at this time, probably between 500,000 and 1 million people. It had a large Jewish population. That's likely where they would have gone first. But we don't know. There's a story of the Coptic Orthodox Church that they end up traveling through different areas in Egypt and kind of do different things. You can look up Mary and Joseph and Coptic Orthodoxy and the flight to Egypt, and you'll find a map of their whole route, and they have a bunch of churches established. So there's some traditions for that, but it's not, I would say it's not necessarily set in stone. Matthew says, this is to fulfill the scripture passage, out of Egypt I have called my son. That's from the book of Hosea. And it talks about, Hosea was written like God leads Israel into the desert to basically take them on a date, to wed them as his bride. It brings up a lot of bridal imagery or nuptial imagery. There's a strong sense here that God is trying to effect a marriage with his people. There's a significant connection to the Exodus, this journey out of Egypt, crossing the Red Sea that happens. Herod orders the massacre. So, Jesus was a baby, not really threatening. Herod decides to kill people. Now, sometimes people will really get caught in, well, how soon do Joseph and Mary and Jesus head down to Egypt? And they'll say, well, when Jesus was 2. I would ask, how do you know? And why do you expect paranoid kings to obey rules? My suspicion is that Herod says everyone 2 and under to kind of catch the edges just in case. You know, he's not the kind of person who says, well, Jesus was born 9 months ago, so if I take everyone that's 1 year old and younger, then that'll be enough. Like, no, paranoid kings don't do that. They're much more like kill them all. That's what paranoia does. So I would argue that it's very possible that Mary and Joseph set out for Egypt likely shortly after Jesus is a newborn until he is about 2 years old. Somewhere in that neighborhood seems to be when they would set out for Egypt. I think you can have a variety of opinions there, but that's just the reality. Bethlehem likely had under 1,000 people at this point. So it's not hundreds of kids that were killed. It's maybe dozens. Women generally had more children then. Something like 60% of children did not survive infancy. That's one of the major pieces of this culture. It's 60 or 70% of kids didn't make it past 5. So it wasn't uncommon for women to have 10 children and have 3 of them that make it into adolescence and adulthood. Like to lose 7 out of 10. So there were likely more kids, but it's not hundreds. It's not rivers of blood. It's a massacre, certainly. But again, I just want to kind of help you try and frame it a little bit, because you can get the impression that it's like hundreds of soldiers and, you know, they're murdering everyone left and right, and lots of kids and mothers. And it's certainly a tragedy, but it's not, you know, it's not 10,000 people. It's not war on the scale that we are used to seeing in the modern world. It's much smaller and more contained. The voice of reaping with Ramah. So Herod dies, and Joseph has another dream.